Hey, before we start, I just want to acknowledge that my family is here, and my grandma is actually here from Fort Wayne, Indiana today on a Tuesday tour. So, welcome. Welcome, Grandma, today. Glad you're here, Grandma. John Acuff is a writer and a speaker, and recently on a blog post, he posted an entry with this title, "The Worst Guy to Invite to Your Christmas Party." The very worst guy to invite to your Christmas party. He says, "Never invite this guy. He's even more annoying than the friend who doesn't even own a TV and tells you that constantly when you're not even talking about TV. And we know that you watch Hulu or Netflix or YouTube. Quit acting like you're a 4th century desert father, for crying out loud. Upon entering your home, the guy who tells you that Christmas is a pagan holiday will proceed to do exactly that. Oh, you've got a Christmas tree. Didn't realize you were into celebrating the winter solstice. Interesting. Are you doing that because you're recognizing the Egyptian tradition of decorating the house with palm branches to symbolize resurrection, or does your family swing more Northern European? Is your Christmas tree a shout-out to the Germanic god Woden? Or perhaps a Roman tribute to Bacchus? Wait, don't tell me. It's the Greeks and Adonai, isn't it? I felt like I was getting an ancient Greek vibe in here. What's that you've got hanging over your entryway? Mistletoe, or as I call it, pagan fertility plant? Babylon in the house. And do I smell ham? Are we having a Christmas ham? That will be delicious. But then you know that that's a symbol of Tammuz, who was fatally wounded by the tusk of a boar. Pagans started that tradition by sacrificing a boar on this pagan holiday. What do you serve with a big plate of meat heresy? Mashed potatoes? What's the side dish in that situation? The worst guy to invite to your Christmas party. I can think of the second worst guy. Second worst guy would be Job. Can you imagine this? You're at the buffet. Job, how's it going? Merry Christmas. If only my anguish could be weighed. If all of my misery could be placed upon the scales, it would surely outnumber the sand and the sea. No wonder my words have been impetuous. The arrows of the Almighty are in me. My soul drinks in their poison. God's terrors are marshaled against me. Job, that sounds rough. Have you tried the deviled eggs? Maybe that'll make you feel better. Does a wild donkey bray when it has grass? Or an ox bellow when it has fodder? Job, I don't know. Is tasteless food eaten without salt? No, it's not. Is there flavor in the sap of the mallow? Job, I have no idea what you even said. I will not touch it. Such food makes me ill. It's hard to be Job at Christmas. It's really hard to be Job at Christmas. There's no one in human history who is more synonymous with suffering than Job. Job is an enduring symbol of all that life should not be, but all too often is. His story begins simply enough. In the very first line of the book of Job, it says, "In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God, and he shunned evil." Now, we should know that something is afoot when a story begins on that note. Because if it would continue on by saying, "And things went pretty well for him," that would make for probably a pretty good life, but a pretty lousy story. And things fall apart for Job very quickly. It's impossible to not feel bad for Job, who through no fault of his own is caught up in this very strange debate between the two most powerful beings in the universe, God and Satan. He's a victim of his own righteousness, Job is. He reminds me sort of Noah as I was thinking about Job this week. Both were noteworthy for their righteousness. It's said of both of these men that there was really no one in their generation who was like them. The difference is that Noah's righteousness condemned the world. Job's righteousness only condemned himself. Job's reward for his righteousness is that he has everything taken from him. You know the story. His health, his wealth, his happiness. Even his family is taken from him, all but a rather unsympathetic wife. He loses everything. It's hard to be Job, and especially at Christmas. There's something about Christmas that amplifies grief and loss. Christmas is a really hard time for a lot of people. For people experiencing grief, for people experiencing loss, there's something that's blinding about the lights of Christmas. There's something that's mocking about the songs that we sing at Christmas. There's something about all these gatherings that we have at Christmas time that just leaves us feeling a little empty. I remember the first Christmas after we lost my sister in a car accident. That first Christmas was really hard. We were all, to some extent or another, reliving her loss all over again. And I remember actually being at my grandma and grandpa's house. And I remember my grandpa gathering us all together before that Christmas lunch. And I don't remember my grandpa as being really the spokesperson for the family, but that day he was. I don't remember what he said. I wish that I do, or I wish that I did. But I do remember feeling grateful, appreciative, that someone was there acknowledging publicly the loss that we were all feeling once again on that day. I wrote these words down a couple of years ago on the 15th anniversary of my sister's death. Loss is always a dull ache, but the cruel irony that the last 15 years have shown me is that during those moments which should rightly infuse the spirit with the most joy, the loss of my sister is most sharply felt. The times when I need my big sister the most are the times when I feel her loss at its worst. This observation isn't new or profound, but anyone who has experienced loss will tell you that every moment of exhilaration, every moment of pride or expectation is tempered by the reminder that there is something incomplete about the moment because it cannot be shared with or enjoyed by someone who must be but cannot be there. Whenever a new chapter is turned in our life, good or bad, there is a protest that arises within us which says, but how could the story possibly go on when one of the essential characters in the story has died? A birth, a death, a new job, a marriage, a graduation, a holiday. Loss is relived in moments such as these and countless others. Christmas is really hard at Job's house. And perhaps there are those in this room this morning who can identify in a very real way. This Christmas is going to be tough for you because it was during this semester that your parents finalized their divorce. Or this Christmas is going to be really difficult because this is the first Christmas without grandma. Christmas is hard at Job's house. The book of Job really isn't about loss. It's about the experience of loss. It's not a book about pain. It's a book about suffering and everything that comes along with that. The alienation, the anger, the bitterness, the questions, the sometimes good and oftentimes bad advice and theological speculation of friends and family. It's a book about the frustrating search for meaning in the midst of suffering, and it's a book that frustrates our desire for an easy, concise answer to a problem that has been common to all people everywhere for all times. Job may be and probably is more righteous than any of us in this room, but his suffering is representative of all of us. After all of the questions have been asked, after all the insufficient answers have been given, God answers Job from out of the storm in Job 38. And God spends 4 whole chapters saying essentially one thing: I am incomprehensibly great in power and purpose. There is nothing sympathetic or pastoral in God's reply. This is no footprints in the sand sentimentality. Job, in his suffering, is not given an answer as to why he has suffered. Instead, he is overwhelmed with a picture of a great God. Now, can I confess something to you this morning? I really do not care for the ending of the book of Job. It's comforting, I suppose, and it's definitely humbling to be given this picture of a God who is huge and a God who is in control. But it isn't really satisfying. And it isn't really good news. There isn't really any gospel whatsoever to be found in Job 38 through 41. If you want to find the gospel according to Job, you have to go combing through the words of Job himself. Like a man who is drowning will still strive to keep popping his head above water just for that grasp of air. Job, a man of constant sorrow from time to time, is still able to pop his head up above the water in a brief moment of hope, in a brief moment of anticipation. The first of these moments that I found is in Job chapter 9. This is what Job says. Since I am already found guilty, why should I struggle in vain? Even if I wash myself with soap and my hands with cleansing powder, you would plunge me into a slime pit so that even my clothes would detest me. He is not a mere mortal like me that I might answer him, that we might confront each other in court. If only there were someone to mediate between us, someone to bring us together, someone to remove God's rod from me, so that his terror would frighten me no more. Then I would speak up without fear of him, but as it now stands with me, I cannot. Now this, of course, doesn't sound very hope-filled, but true hope is often best articulated in the groans of God's people. Job's suffering, and many people who have gone through intense periods of suffering can identify with this. Job's suffering is amplified by the sense of abandonment that he feels from his Creator. God, to make matters much worse, God seems distant. God seems remote. God seems uncaring, and worse than that, God seems unjust. He expresses this sentiment all the way through this book as he dwells upon this suffering that he's enduring. In chapter 23, he says, and this is from the Message. In chapter 23, he says, I am not letting up. I'm standing my ground. My complaint is legitimate. God has no right to treat me like this. It isn't fair. If I knew where on earth to find him, I'd go straight to him. I'd lay my case before him face to face, give him all of my arguments firsthand. I'd find out exactly what he's thinking, discover what's going on in his head. Do you think he'd dismiss me or bully me? No, he'd take me seriously. He'd see a straight living man standing before him. My judge would acquit me for good of all charges. In Job chapter 9, Job is crying out for a mediator. He's crying out for a referee. He's crying out even for a priest. He's crying out for someone to bridge this chasm, someone to bridge this gap between himself and God, because he doesn't understand God and God certainly doesn't understand him. If only there were someone to bridge this gap and mediate between us. Do you hear the gospel? In Job chapter 16, he says something similar. This time with a little bit more hope in his voice. He says, I have sewed sackcloth over my skin and buried my brow in the dust. My face is red with weeping. Dark shadows ring my eyes. Yet my hands have been free of violence, and my prayer is pure. Earth, do not cover my blood. May my cry never be laid to rest. Even now, my witness is in heaven. My advocate is on high. My intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God, on behalf of a man, he pleads with God as one pleads for a friend. Do you hear the gospel? This is hope against all hope. This is hope as seen through the veil darkly, but it is a gospel hope. You'll forgive Job for being a little bit inconsistent, going from one moment from the pit of despair and agony to the next moment grasping onto hope for someone in the very presence of God himself, a friend even, a much more effective and valuable friend than any of the friends that have appeared in the book of Job so far, but a friend who will state his case, who will advocate on his behalf. Longing for that friend, we probably shouldn't expect anyone who is suffering, especially suffering in the way that Job has suffered, to be the model of mental and spiritual stability. But there is hope there, nevertheless, in the midst of his suffering. He says it even more clearly in Job chapter 19. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another, how my heart yearns within me. Do you hear the gospel? What do you get a man who has nothing for Christmas? The only thing that his heart really yearns for, the only thing that his heart really longs for is a mediator, a redeemer. Now, Job is not mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, in this chapter of all of the heroes of faith, but he very well could be. He, just like every other person in this list in Hebrews chapter 11, did not receive everything that was promised, but he only saw it and welcomed it at a great distance. The hope of Job was not fully realized until the events of that first Christmas, which was for him the distant future and for us the distant past. Christmas at Job's house is hard. But there is also no one who appreciates Christmas more than Job. The one who introduced himself to Job as the one who laid the earth's foundation and laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang and all the angels shouted for joy, that very same one came lying in a manger, attended by shepherds, heralded by angels. The one who asked Job, have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? That very same one emptied himself, taking the very nature of a servant and being found in human likeness. The one who asked Job, have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the deepest darkness? That very same one shared in our humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death, made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. The one who asked Job, would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? The very same one learned obedience from what he suffered, so that he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. A Christmas without Job, sanitized of suffering and tears, is really nothing more than a hollow shell. After all, the very first Christmas story was accompanied by weeping. King Herod made sure of that. Every Christmas since has spoken words of comfort and words of joy to the weak, to the broken, to the suffering, to the alienated. Christmas is for all the Jobs of the world. And we aren't altogether different from him, are we? Whether you this season are dealing with a specific tragedy or not, we are all like Job. N.T. Wright says that every person has been created with a deep longing for justice a craving for justice. He calls it the echo of a voice. The residue that has been left over from the Garden of Eden still lives within us. We long for things to be made right. We long for the broken things of this world to be renewed. We long for reconciliation. We long for redemption. We long for justice. We long for all the wrong things of the world to be made right again, starting with us. We long to be known by our Creator and to know Him personally. And praise be to God that the vague hope of Job has become our reality. The gospel of Job has given way to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Our Redeemer does indeed live, and He is reigning at the right hand of the majesty of heaven, interceding on our behalf. So we can say, God rest ye merry, gentlemen. Let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ, our Savior, was born on Christmas Day to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy.